Incoming cage fight. Elon or Zuckerberg?
Ugh, neither. I can't stand either of them, candidly. I mean,
welcome to Cocktails and SOC Tales, the podcast where we make cyber relevant to everyone and unlock the stories of our leading industry professionals. I'm Megan.
And I'm Carly, and on today's show, we're talking about insider risk with Lili Davoudian and how the human element is the weakest link in the security chain. Lili leads a security technical specialist at Microsoft Federal. Her team is responsible for showcasing the technical excellence of Microsoft's security suite to customers in the defense space. Lili recently celebrated 5 years at Microsoft. Congrats. And she previously worked in engineering, where she was instrumental in launching key features across the Microsoft security platform.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome, Lili. What are you drinking?
Thank you guys for having me. I'm having a LaCroix, which is kind of boring, but
I love a good bubble water.
let me say, please.
I love it. I love it. Bubble water is my favorite. That's what I'm drinking. I just added some fruit to it.
It looks very chic.
Am I the only one actually drinking? Well, I'm found
There
some
you go.
wine. I went to get a seltzer and found some
my
wine.
next drink. My next drink has my refill has.
You were not going to show
orange.
That because full disclosure.
What do you got in there?
No, so this is again bubble water, but with a little blood orange
with different
moonshine.
Fruits. Oh, nice.
And some blueberries.
Wait, is there liquor in that or no?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's a local liquor. And
we were just gonna low key both be like seltzer because Lily's our boss. And it's 4:50 Eastern time, so I stumbled through my kitchen and found some Pinot Noir, the healthiest of all wines, as I keep saying.
To that.
I didn't know that.
Because it has the most polyphenols, which elongate your telomeres of your mitochondria. Hello.
Powerhouse of the cell.
That's right. So red wine is the secret to longevity, I think. I'll test that theory out and let you guys know.
I do have a question. Speaking of red wine, Lili, are there any bottles left from that box that you had at Christmas time? Was it Christmas?
No, that box has been long gone, but my boyfriend and I went to Mendoza for a wedding, and he was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to ship like 5 cases of wine back to New York City. And I was like, okay, that's a great idea. Now we're home in our small apartment. Where are you going to put these? So we have to drink them because we have nowhere to store them.
In my belly. That's the answer.
Yeah.
Horror.
All right. You know, the danger here is that we're going to really just start talking about booze and forget to talk about insider risk. All right, let's cue it up.
Well, that's the point. We derailed. That's why we started this, right? All right, Lili, insider risk, human element, why is it so important? Well, before we get there, hold on. I want to jump right to the gun. But tell us about yourself, your background, how you got here, what your cyber why is,
all those things.
Happy to talk about myself. So I've been at Microsoft for about 6 years now. Which feels like a really long time, but then you turn around and people have been here for like 30 years. So relatively not that long. I started in services in MCS. I spent a few years there. I spent a few years in engineering. When I was in engineering, I was able to work with some of the insider product teams, and we were able to ship a solution that really helped us think more holistically about insider and how we really bring that telemetry back to the SOC and use it to really mitigate some of the risk that we see there. It's funny because about a year ago, we used to say that insider was a really advanced use case for most of our customers. And we were like, oh, a lot of them are not there yet. They don't necessarily think about it. We weren't pushing them to think about it. And I think that story has totally blown up over the last 3 months. Part of that is one, we've just seen a massive rise in insider risk activity. I mean, we saw the National Guardsman leak on Discord, which I think really took people for a turn. And customers are asking about it more and more. And I think it's almost becoming more of a basic or foundational element. The problem is that most organizations are so busy thinking about the external threat that they're not thinking about all of the actors in their environment who could have that data leakage. And I think for insider, the most important thing is it doesn't have to be malicious, right? So users are the first and last line of defense. And while users are great, a lot of them don't have either the information they need or the tools they need to be successful when it comes to cloud security. And so that's where we see a lot of accidental data leakage, which can be as detrimental as things like the National Guardsman event.
Yeah, that's
such a good point. So I want to like circle back to this. Jack, the Air National Guardsman, 21 years old, leaked. This is kind of like from my perspective and customers bringing this up. I think this is like the kind of most pressing. It's interesting because we had Edward Snowden a few years ago that kind of raised the same, alerts, alarms, but like we didn't have the technology necessarily to correlate, what he was doing, and could we have prevented this in advance through the use of technology? And that's like a questionable, I was not close enough to the tech at that point to be able to say yes or no. But it's kind of the same thing, really. And what's interesting is if you look back at the like news reporting of this, is that an insider risk management tool, even a like low caliber one, not that advanced, would have prevented this. And further, it comes back to, we always come back to training and awareness on this podcast, is like that being kind of like critical in this case, because humans are our weakest link in this insider risk management story. And this young airman was, there were flags after flags that his chain of command didn't act on. So it's interesting also, as we come back to, we have this phrase that we use on our sales calls it first came up as take the Marine out of the equation. It's taking the airman out of the equation, taking the soldier out of the equation. For some of the accidental and even some of the intentional stuff, is the technology exists now to flip the switch such that remediation or removal of access can occur even without human intervention. Like when there are risk factors that occur, it can be flipped on such that Azure AD triggers removal of access, or removal of access to a particular critical asset, etc. So it's a really interesting story as it unfolds, that it would have been the kind of trifecta, so to speak, if there had been proper training and awareness, proper like chain of command intervention, and then the tool also, and like none of those things took place. So it's like, even in the absence of tech, take a look back at Eddie Snowden, and it's like you still had chain of command and training and awareness. And it's like, okay, we have now the ability to have this like technologically sophisticated, more holistic, and we didn't even do it back when Eddie had his little leak. So I think it's interesting, and it's an interesting discussion to kind of like look at, all right, how far does the tech have to advance to really make this a more holistic solution?
Right. I think there are two interesting points. One is that we've had things like DLP at Microsoft forever, and like various policies and processes that we have to help minimize the blast radius when we do have insider incidents. But I think what's unique about insider is it tells you where to look. And so you need to bring that tech together with the understanding of like, okay, let's use AIML to understand what the baseline of this person is against their former self, or like their history, or against their peer group. Or let's like bring in the HR data to see like who has just put in their 2 weeks. So we have a lot of the tech, but the insider is where you make it smart and where you give it context. The other thing I'll add is the automation is so important because it takes out another place where we could have user error or user like emotional override, where maybe the tech is saying like remove Edward's access, and his manager is like, no, it's fine, like he seems like a great employee, I'm going to let it go. So when we automate that, like not only do we reduce the burden on the individual, but we also make sure that we're getting that consistent response that's not motivated by emotion or other factors that are quite frankly irrelevant.
Now, I think you brought up a great point. Like there's a two-factor human element to it, right? There's the actual insider, and then depending on what your company or even in your home, like what you do, like that intervention piece of who is going to turn the switches if you don't have that machine learning and automation to do it for you, act quicker as well. So I
Right.
think that brings up like a lot of times when you think about insider risk, you only think of the endpoint actor and what they're doing, but you don't necessarily think about, well, what's our response to that? What is happening? Again, and like Megan, like you were saying, that chain of command piece. So that's
Should we take a step back and should we rewind and define what insider risk management is? So we are going to reference this paper. This it was a paper put together, commissioned by Microsoft in November of 2022, building a holistic insider risk management program. And of course, being part of Microsoft, we kind of look to this as a not like a North Star necessarily, but like, all right, there's some kind of actionable insight to be brought to the table here. And for our customers that are, or even really for anyone who's like just taking a first look at insider risk management and thinking like, well, this is a really buzzy word. It's right up there with AI. It's like the top, like most buzziest 2023 words. Like, is this relevant to me? And what can I take away from listening to this? So for the sake of just like, kind of bringing this full circle, insider risk management is defined then from that paper, which I will, by the way, link in the show notes, as the potential for a person to use authorized access to the organization's assets, either maliciously or unintentionally, in a way that negatively affects the organization. So this can include both physical and or virtual cyber access. I've had one sip of wine. Assets include information processes, system, and facility. So I would say this is like the most high level approach. What are, from your perspective, what do you think is something that you should consider to be integrated when you're looking at insider risk? Like, what do you think should be the first place in terms of assets or resources that employees, corporations are considering when they look at, all right, I'm going to deploy insider risk. What does that look like for my organization? Like, what are some of the most common places that they would want to consider when looking at employee access?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, a few years ago when I was in engineering, we had a customer come to us and be like, can you help us build out our insider risk program? And we were like, yeah, but to start, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing today? And they pulled
response was nothing.
Well, it was actually funnier. They pulled up a photo of like a security guy looking at the parking lot, like seeing if anyone had taken documents home, basically. And we were like, okay, that's not going to cut it. There are certain companies where I feel like they've taken it to such an extreme. Like, I know that at Bridgewater, I want to say, which is a hedge fund in Connecticut, they are ultra into privacy, and like, if you print something and you don't pick it up from the printer in like under 3 minutes, like a security guard will pick it up and bring it to you and be like, how dare you? So there's a balance. I mean, I think there are a lot of key pillars that you want to think about. The first one is always privacy and trust, right? Like, at the end of the day, everything that you're doing when you think about insider, of course, is to protect the company and to protect your assets, but it's also about the employees and about making it easier for the end users to be successful and to do their job. So for us at Microsoft, when we were thinking about this from a product perspective, having that trust with employees on how we're monitoring their usage and how we're responding to that has always been super important. So that's the most critical aspect, is making sure that people feel like we're safeguarding their privacy and we're building with that in mind. Beyond that, training is a super foundational pillar. We are only as strong as the last line of defense, and we can give people the best tech in the world, but if they don't know how to use it, it doesn't matter. So we want to make sure that we're training that end user on like, how can I use these policies that I have? How can I use these tools? And then when we get to the SOC players and the tech folks, like, how can they use the workbooks that we have in Sentinel? or some of the compliance comms compliance and things like that in Purview to help. So there's a lot of education that we need. I think from a pure, like, how do you build a holistic IRM strategy? It's really about knowing your data, knowing your estate, classifying it, protecting it, and creating policies that do the work for you. In any kind of security environment, we want to automate as much as we can, right? We want to use policies to standardize things. We want to have that repeatable process to respond. And then we only want to have to bring in the human for those special occasions, because otherwise we're going to completely overload the few security professionals that we do have.
Yeah.
So you mentioned right off the bat privacy and trust. So how important do you think is it to have an insider risk if you're going to have a like dashboard or a pane of glass, whether that is through a SIEM tool such as Sentinel or an IRM dashboard? How important is it that your analysts that are making the review of the signal or the alerts they're receiving don't know who's on the other end of that's potentially performing either the inadvertent or nefarious, interaction with data?
Right. I mean, I think it's important that we try and anonymize what we can. And when something escalates to the level that we then need to act on it, we would be in a position where we can understand, like, who is the player, get the relevant folks involved from like HR or whatever other groups across the company that might be. But having that respect for kind of user privacy should be at the core of any IRM plan.
So then I guess my following question is, being that our focus from the world of defense, Department of Defense, and like looping this back to like the security clearance process, like some of the alerts and triggers or red flags that they use to determine if someone is high risk, low risk, et cetera, are fairly personal, right? So we met with a partner earlier this week. I'm not going to name their name, but they were able to ingest signal from social media and all kinds of stuff, travel sites. So with that regard, it's like privacy is important. How do we reconcile the need to be able to identify these flags from the clearance perspective to being able to reconcile like having some semblance of privacy and like, what kind of comes first? Are we mission focused or are we privacy focused, or do you feel like there's a balance there that we need to strike?
I think it's a really good, really good point. And I will say that I'll say a few things. One, I think it's different for every organization. Like, we're not in the position as a company to make that choice for customers on how deep they want to go. And I think that's why a lot of that signal, if you want to bring it into Purview or if you want to bring it into Sentinel, you're doing it through a third-party connector, right? It's not something that is natively brought into our tooling. And it's because we want the customer to be in control of what level of telemetry they're collecting about the end user. So I think that's something to think about. I think that unfortunately, in this day and age, when you put something on the internet, there are a million different ways it can be used. And most of these partners are bringing in that kind of publicly available data to inform some of their insider programs. And again, I think that's at the discretion of the customer of how much they want to build out and how much they want to respect privacy. But I find that sometimes it's hard to really label some of that as private when it's already publicly exposed.
No, I think that's a good point because, they're like you were kind of saying, Megan, like there is this line of my outside of work life versus my work life. So how do those connect? But when it comes to insider risk, a lot of things, like when you think about indicators of what a potential insider risk is, that all stems from private life or conversations they're having with someone on Instagram
On
or on
Discord or
Twitter or
whatever, yeah.
Discord or whatever. And so
Yeah, because think about it.
what is
Our
that balance, though?
adversaries are not emailing us at work like, hey,
No.
what's the 411 with like such and such project, right? They're like, and we're obviously just like focusing on the more nefarious side of IRM because it's like a little bit more interesting to talk about, I think. And also because we're all guilty of just like accidental, like too much, we shared too much, whatever. But our adversaries are looking for low-hanging fruit on our social media presence. Like they're using open source reconnaissance. And I go back to one of our colleagues, Jay, on the last, the Dadcast, was like, he went around and took photos of the backs of people's cars. Remember this? Where he was like, you tell your entire life story on the back of
I
your car.
remember
Like,
listening this. Yeah.
how difficult would it be for me to strike up a conversation with you? Like, you gotta like, I rescued my Sheltie sticker on the back of your car. How difficult would it be for me to strike up a conversation with you on Instagram or just even in public and do a lot of recon that way?
Get the answers to your security questions.
Oh yeah, true. True story on that too. So it's like, I have strong feelings about like, private professionals should be really delineated, but that's you have to like start thinking in terms of our adversaries and they don't give a hoot,
Well, like how online are you? If you are, in a sense, an influencer, or if you are striving for that kind of status, then you are putting so much of your life publicly on the internet. Your handles aren't set to, you don't have any privacy on your account so that you can get as many followers as you want. And a lot of those sometimes are bots, are, people just fishing to try and see what they can get and then try and talk to you or get some information or get you to click on a link or whatever. And then turn into something towards what your profession is.
And I will say, like, I do think it's much more interesting to talk about malicious insider incidents. I read somewhere that I'm not going to be able to remember where, that the majority of insider data leakage is actually accidental. And so it's not as exciting, right? And it's a little bit harder for organizations to admit that like the fault was maybe theirs. But I think part of that stems from the fact that most organizations don't have that holistic insider program. They might have pieces, like they might have DLP, and they might be using like the entity insights and Sentinel, but they don't have that full end-to-end story. And so things fall through the cracks, or maybe they don't have the training, and that's why you see the accidental leakage. So when thinking about like if I were a customer, where I would really be concerned would actually be that accidental data loss or exposure, more so than the really calculated Edward Snowdens. Because I mean, how many Edward Snowdens do we know about?
Not too many. But I think it also stems back to, in a sense, like what you're saying, those accidentals versus also, in a sense, those nefarious ones. But it's that user behavior. And it goes back to that user behavior monitoring. And is this just a one-off? But, again, when you correlate their action with what the data that action triggered, that was anomalous to their like normal baseline behavior, that's where you get those higher alerts to hopefully catch those accidental spills. Or if it's, continuous, then it's not so accidental and their risk level is higher. And then again, with that automation and machine learning, quarantine them, don't give them access to things, elevate that data loss prevention policy. Different things. And again, that's all automation. That's all things that the human element in your security center doesn't have to do. And, we talk about the human being the weakest link, but, there was a 2023 Gartner report that focuses on the human deal. And it not only insider risk being part of that, but then talk to, in a sense, like human burnout because of all of these, alerts or triage and the time spent. So in a sense, that's where automation and machine learning can help with that human element of burnout, because burnout will then cause somebody to maybe miss something or miss triage something, as well as, doing the work of finding that insider threat.
Completely. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think that with the rise of work from home, and just the complete change in how organizations function, SOC teams have had to deal with an explosion in the attack surface. And so when we talk about automation, it really is from the standpoint of like reducing the burden on the security professional rather than replacing. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes we don't message it well, and it comes across as this replacement mentality, but we simply can't do this work without humans. The whole point of our tooling of the AI ML features is to augment that human intelligence and to make it easier for the operators to do their jobs, especially given just the shortage of security professionals that we have.
No, 100%.
Can we circle back on our most buzzy buzzwords? We've covered IRM, but let's touch on AI. And you mentioned AI ML. So we're gonna like just kind of briefly define. I love to define AI, like
What's your
one of my
definition?
top favorite things. Okay, within the confines of artificial intelligence, like it's always contextual to the environment that you're talking about. There can be AI that's like has access to the entire interwebs. That's one. Or there can be AI that just has access to an environment, like a tenant, or a tenant plus a little bit of the internet, right? So it's based on the context of what they have access to. When we talk about like machines and robots like outsmarting us, like it's really contextual to what they have access to. The entire internet, check, done. They're way smarter than me, like after 30 minutes, maybe 30 seconds. But within the confines of our environment is really just a correlation engine. If you think about it, the ability to correlate data points where a human might not otherwise be able to correlate. So from the perspective with insider risk management, what does that look like? Well, one of the things I always kind of reach back to I'm going to plug it, Microsoft Purview, M365, insider risk management dashboard. One of the correlations that can occur is through HR data connector, that if an employee puts in notice, then now we're looking back at actions taken prior to that notice being given through the end of their tenure of employment. And even so, their access to data during those time periods, and even absent that HR data connector, we're able to now correlate things like, okay, a person downloaded 10 files from SharePoint. That might not be anomalous, but maybe they waited 2 days and they removed the sensitivity labels. Again, as an isolated incident, might not be anomalous, but now they have taken one of those and put it in Dropbox, waited a couple days, taken one of those and emailed it to their Gmail account, and then waited a couple days and, put one on a USB disk. Like these as isolated incidents are maybe nothing special, wouldn't make a SOC analyst turn their head, but through AI now, we have the ability to correlate these as a series of events that are meaningful in context to one another. And that is really, when we talk about AI, it's really the ability to correlate those things where a human might not take a second glance. And that's like a really just like high level. The tool also does something pretty cool, which is a newer feature, adaptive scope, which is essentially the ability to draw context from the user's peer group based on their M365 group and assign risk based on that. So someone that is like in an IT group has more or less like keys to the kingdom. They start with more access. They begin in a higher risk level. So if they download 10 documents locally, it's going to raise them to a higher risk level than if someone from, I don't know, logistics department, for example, did the same thing. That's not nearly as risky because one of them has access to more critical data. And then so thereby, by landing in a higher risk level, they're going to, through adaptive protection, lose access to their higher criticality data sooner, as opposed to someone that has less access to sensitive data. And that can be through a graduated process of remediations. But the most important facet to this is that we're removing the human from the equation of having to make that decision to withdraw access. So that's really the kind of key here. Carly and I talked about automation of assessments from the perspective of doing your like risk management framework and CMMC assessments. And like the way of the future truly is going to be removing the human from the equation and just relying on the telemetry from our devices to report our implementation methodologies up and report our score, our secure score, our compliance score up. And I really feel like we're kind of on the precipice of our insider risk management programs looking very similar to that, where there is now going to be a requirement to remove the human and the emotion and inflection from that decision and base it truly on like the data. Is it, the tenets, know your data, label your data, protect your data, and anything in conflict of that, you remove the human, the emotional aspect of the equation. Oh, well, like that's, I've worked with him for 10 years. There's no way that could happen. Like just remove access and review later as opposed to review and then remove access.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, I think Microsoft as a security platform is going there. If you look in Sentinel, which is our SIMSOAR product, you'll see workbooks that align to CMMC, that align to Insider, that is aligned to NIST, and that really tell you like, okay, let me use connectors to understand your telemetry across your entire estate, whether that's Microsoft, on-prem, third party, and let me map it to these different compliance requirements and then tell you from a neutral perspective where you need to improve and where you're doing well. And so, yeah, I agree. And just like, I mean, Carly can speak to this more, but like doing that manually is a huge burden on individuals, and we need them.
Just going to ask Carly, you have like real world experience from doing these assessments for DIBCAC. Like what are customers actually reporting for their insider risk management compliance level?
So it's interesting because from like the CMMC perspective, all that is required by the regulation is that you train your folks and that they know how to report it. So it really doesn't go into like this next level, advanced level of like insider risk management that like Purview does. Now, a lot of companies do have those teams, do have those products, do have those like tools and techniques. But this is a question that I've been kind of like waiting to ask. But so like we talk about insider risk management from like a holistic program. That's really great and somewhat, I say easy with like quotations to try and implement when you have a larger company. But so many contractors, for example, who work with the Department of Defense are small. Like, there are mom and pop shops. So how do we, protect them from potential insider risk? Because anybody can be. Now, I mean, there have been companies that I've gone to where, their IT shop is one person. And, when we talk to that like assessment piece, I'm asking for policy documentation. He's like, oh, well, it's like all up here. I'm like, that's cool. I'm like, okay, like you win the lottery tomorrow. What happens? Oh, I would never leave. And I'm like, I don't think you're understanding where I'm going. So I literally said, you get hit by a bus. I don't like to use this, but you are like forcing me to use this example.
To kill
like, you die. How is this IT shop going to survive? Also, because the person that you are training to replace you, doesn't have an IT background. He has the potential, which is totally fine. If that's your process, that's fine. I mean, Megan and I have talked about it. We don't have IT backgrounds. Like, so I get it. But how is that person going to know what to do if you don't write it down? It seems excessive because you are a small company and you have 20 people who work here. But if you want to work for the government, you have to have these things. So my question to you, Lili, was going to be, how would these same applications potentially be able to be applied to smaller companies or, even in the individual in a sense?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and I think we have a huge privilege of being at Microsoft because we have a lot of resources to put something together. And even
Yeah.
with the Microsoft resources, it's fairly recent, I'll say, that I think we started taking Insider very seriously, and we built out a program for ourselves that we then realized customers could benefit from. So I think we really did try and do a lot of the legwork for customers, because it's a lot of work, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of commitment. And when you have a small company, you're not prioritizing Insider. You're
Right.
just not. So at Microsoft, I do think it's our responsibility to make it as easy as possible for customers, especially the smaller resource constrained ones, to be able to adopt quickly. And that's where I think the power of the products come in, by making it easy to have the tech. I think even with how amazing and easy to use the products can be, that English, with that, it's still, you can never do anything to overcome the barrier of training. And that's where we
100%.
need to invest with customers through partners, and things like that, because we can give the best technology that's easy to use, easy to adopt, easy to turn on, which is really what I think we've done with Insider Risk and Purview, and with the connectors into Sentinel, and with some of the playbooks and workbooks in Sentinel. I think the tech is really best of breed. I think it's very comprehensive. It brings together the end-to-end story. It's easy to adopt. All of that is great. But where we still have the responsibility is educating customers on implementation and on broad adoption.
That's great. And I think that also, that brings up another kind of question that I had or thought, in regards to like that education. Again, Megan said it, we allude to training and awareness like very often because again, people aren't going to know what to do if you don't tell them what to do, and you have to continue to tell them.
Right.
As silly as it sounds, people always complain about taking the cyber awareness challenge every year, but you have to take it. It's for some people they look at it as just checking the block, but that's also you saying I will adhere to your rules and your policies, and if I don't read them and then I break the rules, that's on me because I've also signed that I would do this. But so I say that with, as we are increasing monitoring, user, even not even just necessary from a true insider, but I guess we set up security to help with insider risk as well. So anyway, like bring your own devices. I remember like we had a customer meeting, and we were talking about how, because they had a lot of questions about bring your own device. It's a lot cheaper for companies if they say that you can just log into, a remote desktop or the VPN or download, Outlook or whatever onto your phone and work from your phone or work from your own computer, or you're a contractor. So you only need to come into our network when you work for us. So with that, like, we talked about what Microsoft policies and requirements are. I mean, I remember on my first day, I'm like, I gotta download Authenticator and Defender, and then I can start logging into everything to start using it. But then that means that my phone is being, in a sense, monitored within limits. Like Microsoft puts it within limits. And I mean, I remember when we were having this conversation, they were like, oh, our users would never like want to do that. I'm like, well, if they want to work from their phone, that's what they have to do. You just outline what you do. So with that said, what struggles or how to jump over those hurdles, I guess? Like what are some, ways, what are your thoughts on that with how to, go beyond those barriers with the culture piece of all of these increased security things?
The culture piece is really important. I actually think when we think about adoption, there are two facets. The first one is, I do not think that most companies are taking insider risk seriously enough. And so
Hmm.
that's a huge problem that we need to solve. There are, the hot button Snowden's, National Guardsmen, things that hit the press. And in some cases, we can use that to say, like, please think about insider holistically and avoid this happening again with that customer, with fellow customers. So those are sometimes accelerators, but we are now starting to see customers come and be like, I care about insider, please help me, but we need to see it more. I think zero trust is actually helping a lot with this. Speaking of, how many buzzwords can we hit? But when you
Yes.
move to this notion of assume breach, to me, that inherently implies, okay, maybe the adversary is already in your environment and maybe they actually work at your company. Again, by accident or on purpose. So a big barrier we need to overcome is making customers care about insider. I think we are getting there. I think the tides are changing. I think a big reason for this is the air gap networks and the rise that we're seeing of these secret and top secret workloads, where due to kind of them being disconnected from the internet, as we think about the threat landscape, one of the biggest concerns that we do have is that insider risk. And some of our customers in the US government space really do understand that, and they're working to prepare for that. But we need to do a better job educating all organizations on the insider risk. So that's one. And then snowball from that would be, we need organizations to take it seriously back to their end user. So like some of it is training, like how seriously are we taking the training? Are people learning anything from it? Are they just clicking through it and not retaining any meaningful information? So that's a big part. And then, of course, the culture of like, are we fostering work environments where people actually understand the security risk? I think since we all work in this space, we're so over inundated with it that
100%.
to us it's second nature, but it's not to most.
No, I think that's a good point. Like you said, because we're in it, we're always thinking about it, but others aren't. And I mean, I've shared certain things as they come up, like with family. They're like, oh, I didn't think about that.
I
Or,
have a friend who has a startup and he has an employee who is very disgruntled and he thinks is going to leave. And when he was telling me the story this weekend, my first thought was like, well, how do you know he's not taking your business plan and all your interesting ideas, and maybe he's going to go work for a competitor and take them with him, right? Because you're a small company, you're a startup of like 10, 15 people. He hasn't signed, maybe he signed something, but he probably hasn't signed anything. You don't have any policies in place. So for us, that's like the first thing I think about. He probably would never think about that because no one's taught him to think about that.
and I think that's the same issue, like exactly similar to your friend with a startup. A lot of these smaller companies, they start these companies with that product in mind or that tool, not necessarily about the IT side of it. And,
Yeah.
That was always a big challenge, when working with the government, and still is the challenge in regards to the regulations and requirements within their contracts for CMMC or NIST 800-171 compliance. They're like, I make bullets, or like, it's how, and a lot of people sometimes don't think about, well, how is what I make national security?
Right. And I mean, I
And
will say, like, in defense of our customers, especially the customers in the US government space,
yeah,
there are very serious nation state threats right now. I mean, there is a very complex threat landscape. The attack surface is massive. So they're dealing with a lot of these kind of third party concerns. And I understand that and I really sympathize with that. But I think they're doing that sometimes at the expense of the insider story, because they are two separate types of risk. But I think we've almost seen customers be so hyper focused on the third party threat landscape that they're not looking inward.
Great points.
yeah, very good
So
point.
we are quickly approaching my favorite part of the
That's what I was gonna say.
show. We do
I
rapid
said,
fire questions,
Mhm.
and you have to answer them rapidly. But
No
first,
thinking.
I am going to start with a question that's maybe not as rapid fire, but it's like at the top of my list. Lili, why security? You've been MCS, you've been in engineering, you were an Aspire hire, like you have landed in security and here you are
Yeah.
persisting. Why security? Why is it important to your journey?
So it's funny because the day I joined the team, Vishal, who's, our collective leader, was having everyone record their why security stories. And they were all so good. Everyone had these really personal stories. And I was like, oh no. Mine is super on accident. I mean, I got into security just because of where I was. Like, I guess in hindsight, you could say right place, right time, but it really just happened. And the more I learned about it, the more I felt like over the last few years, security has grown, but it was so neglected. And it was the source of so much harm for people, for customers. And so I just found it really interesting. But it wasn't a deliberate choice. It really just happened by accident.
So you're in the same boat as us.
Exactly.
We got here and we don't know how, but we're here.
Yeah,
But
one
we're
day
here.
we woke up and we were here.
Carly, can you see
Alright.
my rapid fire questions or
I
no?
can.
All right. You take the next one. I
You
don't
want
know
me
if
to
I
take
can
the
say
first two?
it. I
I'll
don't know if
take
I
the
can say
first
it with
two.
a straight face.
All right, just tell
I know
me I'm
you
ready.
can't. I saw you type it, and I know you can't.
I
I'll
was
take the
smirking.
I'll
Okay,
take the
go.
first two.
Okay.
You can take the last three. So you asked why security. So incoming cage fight, Elon or Zuckerberg?
Ugh, neither. I can't stand either of them, candidly. I mean, from like a fitness perspective, maybe Mark, because Elon
is-
just looks like,
You have to
I
put
think
$100
Elon-
down right now. Where is it going?
It's going to Mark. I think Elon's a fraud. I mean, I can't stand either of them, candidly. But I guess I would take Mark. But I can't stand either of them.
Valid.
Fair.
How many countries have you visited?
I can't give you a number.
How many countries in 2023 so far? We're at the halfway point. We just ended the halfway point,
She
so
can't be bothered to track these things.
Maybe like 10.
I was gonna say, when was the last time you had to renew your passport? Because that's 25 right
I
there.
renewed my passport last year. And it was an ordeal. I did one of those same day renewals.
That's a
Have you
thing.
ever done this? If you have travel coming up, you can get it the same day, but you have to sacrifice a day of your life and a lot of your sanity. But yeah, I did it a year ago.
Okay.
So fairly recently.
Passport. Does that surprise anybody? I don't have a passport. Okay. Should
No, doesn't surprise
you know
me.
this question is coming? Should Edward Snowden be given amnesty?
I am not in the position to make a case on that. I do not know enough about the legal side of the story. I
Valid.
personally think that whatever he deserves will come to him.
What a politically correct answer. I love
That's
it.
right.
Okay, last question. If you were in college now, but would ChatGPT be helping you with your homework?
Yeah, ChatGPT would do all my homework. Why would I do any of my own homework?
That's how I feel.
I use it now all the time. I'm like,
Right.
make this email better. Write Carly's Connect. Blah, blah, blah. I love it. I think it's the best thing ever. I'm all for it. I would have it replace me if I could.
Well, I would not have it replace you.
No.
We appreciate you coming
No.
on today's podcast so much. Thank you for listening to
Yeah.
Cocktails and SOC Tales, the podcast where we make cyber relevant to everyone and unlock the stories of our leading industry professionals.
Thanks again, Lili, for joining us and sharing your experiencing and thoughts about cyber and insider risk and wine. You can find more details about the show in the notes below, and you can find Megan and I here at Cocktails and SOC Tales on YouTube on Wednesdays. Make sure to subscribe to this channel, like the video, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a beat. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.